I chose holding Robert's hand for 7 more days over having a roof over my head. An 80-year-old widow enters Judge Judy's courtroom in what appears to be a routine. Small claims case over unpaid rent totaling $2,541. She wears a simple, neatly pressed floral dress, clutches a worn leather purse to her chest, and moves slowly with the help of a wooden cane. Her hands tremble as she takes her seat at the defendant's table. Her eyes are red and swollen from crying. This is Margaret Sullivan. Within minutes, she will make a confession so devastating, so heartbreaking, that Judge Judy will do something she has never done in 28 years of television. She will stand from her bench, walk away in complete silence, and the entire courtroom will realize they are not witnessing a simple legal dispute. They are witnessing a tragedy that exposes the cruelty of America's healthcare system and the impossible choices millions of elderly people face every day. The plaintiff is 62-year-old David Morrison, a landlord who owns a small 12-unit apartment building in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. But he is not just any landlord. David Morrison was the best friend of Margaret's late husband for more than 50 years. They served together in Vietnam in 1968. They survived Da Nang together. They came home together for 43 years. Margaret and her husband Robert lived in David's building, paying their rent on time every single month without failing till 3 months ago. 3 months ago, Margaret stopped paying. She stopped answering David's calls. She stopped opening the door when he knocked. And now, despite the pain it causes him, and despite a friendship spanning half a century, David Morrison has been forced to sue the widow of his best friend for $2,541 in unpaid rent. What? No one in that courtroom knows yet what David Morrison himself does not know is why Margaret stopped paying. And when she finally reveals the truth, it will break everyone's heart. Before revealing what Margaret confessed that left Judge Judy completely speechless, I need you to hit the subscribe button right now. Less than 4% of viewers are actually subscribed. This story of sacrifice, dignity, and the impossible decisions faced by the elderly needs to reach everyone. If you believe senior citizens deserve better than this, if you have ever watched a loved one struggle with devastating medical costs, if you believe the system is broken, subscribe now, because what happens next will shatter you and then give you hope again. This is not just about one widow. It is about the millions of Americans who are one medical emergency away from losing everything they have spent their entire lives building. Margaret Sullivan and Robert Sullivan met in 1964 at a church social in Brooklyn. She was 22, a young elementary school teacher with her whole life ahead of her. Robert was 24, working for the Postal Service and building a future one paycheck at a time. They fell in love over shared dreams of a simple, honest life. They married in 1965 in a small ceremony with close family and friends. For 58 years, they built that life together. Margaret taught second grade for 35 years, shaping young minds and loving every moment of it. Robert delivered mail for 40 years, rain or shine, always smiling at the people on his route. They never bought what they could not afford. They clipped coupons. They saved every spare dollar. They drove the same car for 15 years. They took modest vacations. Over 58 years of careful living and patient saving. They accumulated $127,000 in their retirement account. It was not a fortune, but it was theirs. It represented security, peace of mind, and perhaps something to leave to their grandchildren. It represented decades of sacrifice and discipline. They had 2 children. Their daughter Sarah died in a car accident in 1998, a loss that nearly destroyed them both. Their son Michael moved to California years ago, and over time their relationship grew distant. Margaret has 5 grandchildren she barely knows, as distance and family tensions created walls too high to climb. But Margaret and Robert had each other, and in their rent-controlled one-bedroom apartment, costing $847 a month, surrounded by photos and memories of 58 years together, they were content. David Morrison, Robert's brother in every way except blood, owned the building and had always treated them like family. He never raised their rent more than absolutely necessary. When repairs were needed, David handled them personally. When times were hard, he gave them grace. This was more than a landlord-tenant relationship. This was family love, built over decades of shared history and mutual respect. 18 months ago, everything changed. Robert Sullivan was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Doctors gave him 6 months to live, maybe 9 if they were lucky. There was an experimental treatment available, but it was not FDA approved for his stage of cancer. Medicare would not cover it. Private insurance denied the claim immediately. But the treatment offered hope. It offered the possibility of more time. It cost $8,400 every single month. Margaret Sullivan looked at her husband of 58 years, the man who had stood by her through the death of their daughter, through every joy and every sorrow, and made a decision that would cost her everything. She decided Robert's life was worth more than their savings. She decided that every extra day with him was worth any price. She had no idea this decision would eventually lead her to Judge Judy's courtroom. Facing eviction from the only home she had known for 43 years, drowning in debt and completely alone. For 16 months, Margaret Sullivan paid for the experimental treatment. Every month, $8,400 went to the medical center. She watched their life savings evaporate like water under the desert sun. The first payment dropped their account to $118,600, then $110,200, then $93,400, month after month. The number shrank while Robert gained a little more time. Margaret never complained. She never hesitated. She sat beside Robert during every treatment, holding his hand through the nausea and pain, reading him his favorite books, playing music from their wedding day. She made sure he was never afraid, never alone, and never doubted for a single second that he was worth every penny. After 8 months, the savings account hit zero, completely empty. 58 years of careful saving were gone. But Robert was still alive, still fighting, still squeezing her hand every morning when he woke up. So Margaret did what millions of desperate Americans do when medical bills exceed their means. She started using credit cards. 5 different credit cards were approved based on her decent credit score and teaching pension. She maxed them out one by one: $5,000 on the first card, $8,000 on the second, and $7,000 on the third. The bills kept coming, and she kept paying. Because stopping the treatment meant watching Robert die faster, and she could not do that. She absolutely could not do that 3 months ago. Margaret faced a choice that still haunts her every night. She had exactly $847 in her checking account. The rent was due. Robert's treatment was due. She could not pay both. Sitting at their small kitchen table, the same table where they had eaten breakfast, together for 43 years, she made a decision. She paid for Robert's treatment. She chose her husband over her home. She chose 7 more days of holding his hand over keeping a roof over their heads. Then she did it again the next month, and the month after that. Each month, she opened the door to find David Morrison's rent notices piling up. Each month, she heard him knocking, calling her name, asking if she was okay. But she could not face him. She could not explain that she was choosing homelessness rather than letting Robert die one day sooner. The shame was crushing. The guilt was overwhelming. But the love was stronger than both. Robert Sullivan died 8 weeks ago in the bedroom he and Margaret had shared for 58 years, with her holding his hand and whispering that she loved him. He lived 7 months longer than the original prognosis 7 months that cost. $127,000 in savings, and $31,000 in credit card debt. 7 months that cost Margaret her financial security, her home, and her future. The funeral was small. David Morrison attended, confused about why Margaret had been avoiding him, having heard that his best friend's widow had shut him out. Michael flew in from California for 2 days and left without truly reconnecting. The grandchildren sent flowers, and when everyone left, Margaret returned to an apartment filled with memories and drowning in debt. The credit card bills arrived daily. The eviction notice came 2 weeks after Robert's funeral. And now she is sitting in Judge Judy's courtroom, about to lose the last piece of her life with Robert. Judge Judy looks up from her notes, her expression professional but not unkind. The courtroom is full, as it always is, with people waiting for their own cases and regular viewers who attend every session. David Morrison sits at the plaintiff's table, visibly uncomfortable, his hands clasped tightly together. He wears a simple suit that is slightly too big for him, as if he has lost weight from stress. When Judge Judy calls the case, her voice cuts through the room with its familiar authority. She states that Mr. Morrison is suing Mrs. Margaret Sullivan for unpaid rent in the amount of $2,541, covering 3 months, and that he is also seeking possession of the apartment. She asks him why he brought the case. David Morrison stands slowly, the pain in his voice obvious to everyone listening. He explains that Margaret Sullivan has been his tenant for 43 years. But more than that, her husband Robert was his best friend. They served together in Vietnam and were like brothers. He loved Robert like family and loved Margaret the same way. His voice cracks slightly as he continues. He says she has not paid rent in 3 months. He has tried calling her and has knocked on her door dozens of times, but she will not speak to him or explain what is happening. He adds that his property taxes went up 40% this year and that he has his own medical bills for diabetes and heart problems. He says he cannot afford to carry tenants who do not pay, even when they are family, especially when they refuse to communicate with him. Judge Judy nods and makes notes, then turns her attention to Margaret. The elderly woman sits perfectly still, her hands gripping her purse so tightly that her knuckles are white. Tears stream down her face, but she makes no sound. Mrs. Sullivan. Judge Judy says, her tone gentler than usual. Mr. Morrison says you have not paid rent in 3 months and will not communicate with him about why. What is your response to this lawsuit? Margaret opens her mouth, but no words come out. She tries again and manages only a small sob. The courtroom watches in uncomfortable silence as the 80-year-old woman struggles to speak. Judge Judy waits with unusual patience. Finally, Margaret whispers something so quietly that even the microphones barely catch it. She says her husband died. The courtroom shifts. David Morrison's face shows genuine shock, making it clear he did not know the exact timeline. Judge Judy leans forward slightly and tells Mrs. Sullivan she is very sorry for her loss. She asks when her husband passed away. Margaret's voice is barely audible as she says it was 8 weeks ago. Judge Judy's expression softens in a way that regular courtroom viewers rarely see. She tells Mrs. Sullivan she understands her grief and that losing a spouse after 58 years is devastating. But she points out that Robert passed away 8 weeks ago, and the rent stopped being paid 3 months ago, meaning the rent stopped before his death. She asks Margaret to help her understand what happened 3 months ago that caused her to stop paying rent. Margaret's tears fall faster now, dropping onto her clasped hands. She takes a shaky breath, and when she speaks, her voice trembles but grows stronger with each word. She tells the court that Robert was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 18 months ago. The doctor told them he had 6 months to live. Maybe 9 if they were very lucky. But there was a treatment and experimental treatment that might give him more time. It was not FDA approved for his stage. Medicare would not cover it. Our insurance denied the claim, but it might work. It might give us more time together. She pauses, gathering strength. That treatment cost $8,400 every single month. We had saved $127,000 over our entire lives together. 58 years of being careful with every dollar, of never buying what we couldn't afford, of planning for our retirement. That money was supposed to last us through our old age. It was supposed to be our security. The courtroom goes completely silent. Even Judge Judy sits perfectly still, listening intently. Margaret continues, her voice breaking. But when the doctor said this treatment might give Robert more time, I couldn't say no. How do you tell your husband of 58 years that he's not worth the money? How do you choose a bank account over the man you've loved since you were 22 years old? So I paid for the treatment every month at $1,400. I watched our savings disappear. First, it was $120,000, then $100,000, then $80,000. I watched 58 years of our life together drain away month after month. But Robert was still here. He was still holding my hand. He was still telling me he loved me. He was still here. She wipes her eyes with a tissue already soaked through. After 8 months, our savings were gone completely empty. Every penny we had saved was gone. But Robert was still alive, and the treatment was working well enough to give us time. So I did what millions of Americans do when medical bills destroy their savings. I got credit cards, 5 of them. I maxed out every single one, $31,000 total, just to keep paying for his treatment. Because what else could I do? Stop the treatment and watch him die faster. David Morrison sits with his hand over his mouth, his eyes filled with tears. He had no idea. None of this was in the case file. Judge Judy leans back in her chair, processing what she is hearing. Margaret's voice drops to almost a whisper. 3 months ago, I had $847 in my checking account. The rent was due. Robert's treatment was due. I couldn't pay both. I sat at our kitchen table, the same table where we had eaten breakfast together for 43 years, and I had to choose. Do I pay the rent and keep our home, or do I pay for the treatment and keep my husband alive a little longer? She looks directly at Judge Judy now, her voice steady despite the tears. Your Honor, I chose my husband. I chose Robert over our apartment. I chose holding his hand for 7 more days over having a roof over my head. And then I did it again the next month. And the month after that, I heard Mr. Morrison knocking on my door. I saw his notices, but I couldn't face him. I couldn't explain that I was choosing to become homeless rather than let Robert die one day sooner. If this story is breaking your heart the way it's breaking everyone's in that courtroom, hit the subscribe button right now, because what Judge Judy does next will restore your faith in humanity. This isn't just about one widow's impossible choice. This is about the millions of elderly Americans facing the exact same decision every single day in the wealthiest country in the world. Subscribe if you believe our system is broken and needs to change. Margaret's voice cracks completely now. But she pushes through. Robert died 8 weeks ago in our bedroom, in our bed, with me holding his hand. Do you want to know what the cruelest part is, Your Honor? After 16 months of treatment, after spending every penny we had, after going $31,000 into debt, after sacrificing everything we built together over 58 years, Robert lived exactly 7 months longer than the doctors originally predicted. 7 months. I bought him 7 extra months at the cost of our entire life savings and our home. She looks down at her hands. And do you want to know what I did with those 7 months? I sat beside him every single day. I held his hand. I read him his favorite books. I played the music from our wedding. I told him stories about when our children were young. I made him laugh even when he was in pain. I made sure he was never alone for a single second. I made sure he was never afraid. The courtroom is so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. Several people in the gallery are openly crying. David Morrison has tears streaming down his face. Margaret takes a final shaky breath. So yes, Mr. Morrison, I owe you $2,541, and I have no way to pay you. I have no savings. I have no credit left. I receive a pension of $1,850 a month. After paying my utilities, my minimum credit card payments, and buying my medications, I have about $400 left. At that rate, it would take me 6 months just to pay you back, and I would have no money left for food. I am 80 years old. I am alone. I am broke. And in 30 days, I will be homeless. But, Your Honor, I would do it all again, every single penny, every sacrifice. Because those 7 months of holding Robert's hand while he wasn't afraid were worth everything. For the first time in 28 years of television. Judge Judy is completely speechless. She sits perfectly still, staring at Margaret Sullivan with an expression courtroom veterans have never seen before. Slowly, she removes her glasses and everyone notices her eyes glistening with tears. Judge Judy, the woman known for her sharp tongue and no-nonsense attitudes, visibly emotional. The silence stretches for what feels like an eternity. Then, without a word, Judge Judy stands up from her bench. The bailiff looks confused, unsure of protocol. The entire courtroom freezes. In 28 years, this has never happened. Judge Judy steps down from the bench, her robe flowing behind her, and approaches Margaret directly. She gently places her hand on the elderly woman's shoulder. Margaret looks up with tear-filled eyes. Mrs. Sullivan, Judge Judy says quietly, her voice thick with emotion, "Look at me." Margaret meets her gaze. And Judge Judy continues, "In 28 years of doing this show, I have heard every excuse imaginable for not paying debts. I have heard lies, manipulations, and sob stories designed to avoid responsibility. What you just told me is not an excuse. It is a tragedy. And it is a tragedy happening in thousands of homes across this country every single day." Judge Judy turns to face David Morrison, her voice regaining some of its familiar strength. "Mr. Morrison, I am going to ask you a question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. If Robert Sullivan were sitting here instead of his widow, if your best friend from Vietnam were the one who had gone into debt to save Margaret's life, and he came to you and said, 'David, I spent everything to keep her alive, and now I can't pay rent,' what would you have done?" David Morrison stands immediately, his voice breaking. "I would have told him to forget the rent, Your Honor. I would have told him, 'Robert, you're my brother. You don't owe me anything.'" He turns to Margaret, tears streaming down his face. "Margaret, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you call me? Robert was my brother. You're my sister. I would have helped. I would have done something." Margaret's voice is barely a whisper. "I was ashamed, David. I couldn't keep a roof over our heads. I couldn't even pay $847. I failed." Judge Judy's voice cuts through firmly. "Mrs. Sullivan, you didn't fail. The system failed you. A country that forces an 80-year-old woman to choose between her husband's life and her home has failed. A healthcare system that makes life-saving treatment available but not affordable has failed. You didn't fail anyone. You loved your husband enough to sacrifice everything. And that's not failure. That's the kind of love most people only dream about." David Morrison walks over to the defendant's table and does something completely unexpected. He rips up the lawsuit papers right there in front of everyone. "Your Honor, I'm dropping this case. Margaret doesn't owe me anything. She never did. I should have checked on her. I should have known something was wrong when she stopped answering. I was so focused on my own problems, my property taxes, my medical bills, that I didn't think about what she might be going through. Judge Judy nods slowly. Mr. Morrison, that's very generous of you. But dropping the lawsuit doesn't solve Mrs. Sullivan's real problem. She still has $31,000 in medical debt and only $400 a month after her expenses. She's still facing homelessness in 30 days. Then Judge Judy does something absolutely unprecedented. She pulls out her phone right there in the courtroom and makes a call. The entire courtroom watches in stunned silence as she speaks, her voice firm and commanding. I need you to contact the Patient Advocate Foundation and the National Council on Aging. Immediately, get them in touch with Margaret Sullivan. By the end of the day today, she ends the call and looks directly at Margaret. Mrs. Sullivan, I cannot bring your husband back. I cannot give you those 58 years or the $127,000 you spent keeping him alive. But I can make absolutely certain that you don't lose your home. Judge Judy's next words send shockwaves through the courtroom. My show is going to pay your $31,000 medical debt directly to the creditors. Every single penny. You will start next month with a clean slate. Margaret's hands fly to her mouth as she begins, sobbing uncontrollably. The gallery erupts in gasps and then spontaneous applause. Judge Judy continues over the noise. We're also going to cover 6 months of your rent, paid directly to Mr. Morrison, to give you time to stabilize your finances and grieve your husband properly without the fear of eviction hanging over your head. David Morrison rushes forward and embraces Margaret tightly. I'm so sorry. He whispers loud enough for the microphones to catch. I'm so sorry, I didn't know. Robert would never forgive me if I let you go through this alone. Margaret clings to him, this man, who was her husband's brother in every way that mattered. Robert loved you so much, David. He talked about you until his last day. 6 months later, Margaret Sullivan is still living in her rent-controlled apartment in Bay Ridge, surrounded by 58 years of memories. Her medical debt is completely cleared. She started attending grief counseling, finally processing Robert's death without the crushing weight of financial panic. Her son Michael flew in from California and has been calling weekly, their relationship slowly healing. David Morrison created the Robert Sullivan Memorial Fund in his building, providing rent assistance to elderly tenants facing medical crises, ensuring that no one else suffers in silence the way Margaret did. The video of Margaret's confession and Judge Judy's response has been shared over 30 million times across every platform. Thousands of people commented, sharing their own stories of medical debt destroying their families. Patient advocacy organizations reported a 400% increase in calls from seniors seeking help. Margaret now volunteers at a local hospice center, holding the hands of dying patients and telling them they're not alone, giving to others what she gave to Robert. If Margaret's story moved you, if you believe our elderly deserve better than impossible choices between medicine and rent, share this video right now. Hit that like button if you think Judge Judy did the right thing. Comment below if you or someone you love has faced medical debt, because every comment adds to the conversation about fixing our broken healthcare system. Subscribe for more stories that expose the truth while celebrating the human spirit that refuses to give up. Margaret Sullivan chose love over money. Judge Judy chose compassion over protocol. David Morrison chose forgiveness over anger. And together, they showed us that even in our darkest moments, humanity still exists. This is why we share these stories, not just for entertainment, but to change hearts, to change minds, and to change systems one story at a time.